Hi Chris, how are you?
Good evening, Rod. Here we go again. This is our future episode. I think that we're putting in the bank for when you're away on your hollybobs with your family.
This is the idea. If anything world-shattering happens between when this comes out, which is we're recording on a Monday, but it's not coming out till next Monday. It's all on you to try and get something up quickly, Chris.
Yeah, I'm sure I could cover that with my vast experience of editing audio, video, recording a show. I'll be fine.
You've got a lot of practice doing all that stuff now.
I've got zero practice, and there would be many text messages to you going, "What do I have to do? How do I log in?
It's all.
How do you cut audio?" So we are episode 126. We're recording this on the 17th of June, but it's going to go out on the 24th of June, 2024.
That is the idea, yes.
Shall we dive into some follow-up? We were going to just talk a little bit about iOS 18. Obviously, that was the crux of the last show, was discussing that. The one I just wanted to cover, which isn't you haven't put in the notes, but I've just added, just briefly, I wanted to add this as a follow-up item. There was no mention, absolutely zero mention, of Apple Music. It didn't really get mentioned. It's not really got any features. I think we covered them in the last show. But where's like some iOS 18 sprinkled on it? And surely it's ripe for a bit of AI. Like, give me some smart AI generated playlists and all of that. Because you've got a data set there that you own. You've got the personal context that is me and my listening and all that stuff you know about me and what I favorited and songs I constantly play. Because you replay it to me. I say you, I mean Apple. Apple, you replay it to me every year. So I can't believe they've done nothing with Apple Music. I could believe it if they're maybe going to move Apple Music to a different cadence and it's going to come out in point releases. But I was just really surprised because I thought that would be a great area for them to do stuff with AI, very uncontroversially, because it's, you know, the personal context that's on device and the catalogue that they own. I just thought it was odd.
And it's no, you're not wrong, and it is probably the one area where people wouldn't be surprised to be offered something that an algorithm could present to them.
Yeah, like I say, you could do some clever playlists for the time of day. You know, oh look, you're in a car. Normally, when you're in the car, you like this kind of music. I don't know. You're doing your morning commute. I thought about it after we recorded, and I just thought I didn't really say anything about Apple Music because there was nothing to say.
Yeah, you're not wrong. They are quite rubbish with the Apple Music app. I mean, we've talked about Apple Classical at length and the fact that it hasn't really translated well to anywhere else, particularly in the car, for example, where you think that might be a natural place to have that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it did come to the car, but crashed on launch, and then it never came back after they pulled that release. So, yeah, it's an odd one, isn't it? I think I do like the new icon, though, in dark mode, because you get a black square with a red musical note, which I do quite like.
I suppose that's something. I mean, I do slightly worry about the way they embed a lot of the features within the operating system. You know, Android made that divorce of some apps not being tied to it. You had the Play Store would be independent of the actual operating system things, so they could iteratively update their applications more frequently and not have to wait for major operating system upgrades. And actually, in hindsight, I think that's a really clever thing to have done. They can go quite quickly and when they want to, you know, speed through things and then have big core features for the operating system. And then if there is something interesting that they want to jump on quite quickly and then abandon immediately, but at least they've got the ability to do so.
I think there's two things there. One, they need to decouple the apps from the major releases, or at least the cycle, but they also need the culture within the organisation to go, right, you're the music app team, you can go, run off and do things. Because what are these guys and girls doing all year round? They must have developers on the app all the time, surely. So I'm just curious. And same with Classical, it is kind of divorced from the OS, but just let them crack on as if they were an independent app team. You've still got to abide by all the rules of the App Store and Apple, but you just do it on your own cadence. Brilliant. And then in September, we expect you to do a release, at least a compatibility one with the latest OS. You've got to do that, but do your own cadence, have your own plan, have your own strategy. I just find it all a bit odd.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I get the impression with lots of Apple's apps, though, it's like they get them to a point where they're vaguely happy with them and then they just abandon them for a couple of years until they're made to go and do something about it again. And you see that with Chess, for example, the Chess app that's been on macOS 10 since macOS 10 beta back in the day. It just got a sprinkling in macOS Sequoia where it looks 3D and they've put some new sort of renderers and things on it. How long has that been? It's been 9 years, I think, since Jess app's been updated. And you see that in Terminal, and you see that in Music, and you see that in all the other apps except maybe the productivity ones, which are updated a little more frequently. But most of the core apps are really not updated all that frequently at all.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they took the Apple Music team off of Apple Music, put them on the Chess app to Swift UI it, and then they'll go back onto Apple Music. It just seems odd for a company so big. They should have dedicated teams doing it. And Apple do seem to be going back and Swift UIing some of their old code. I think they are trying every year to chip away at their code base and modernise it and their look and feel. So they get a tick for that. But anyway, I think we should move on, otherwise we're going to have a long show. But I just thought it was a super interesting point because they showed Apple TV Plus service at the start of the keynote and there was zero reference to Apple Music. And I just thought that was a bit odd.
Or HomePods either, for that matter. So yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem. So should we do a little bit of follow-up then? So the first one off, and just keeping with our theme from last show, Apple Intelligence we talked about wasn't going to come until a bit later, but there's a bunch of things we're pretty sure, according to to Mac Rumors at least, that these features won't come until 2025. So 2025 is a decent way away, and they're specifically personal context. So that was a big feature of the Apple Intelligence, that what you're looking at on the screen and what you're doing right now and adding to your calendar and doing all that kind of stuff that Siri things basically won't be there. Semantic indexing, so this is store retrieved data from emails and images and websites and things like that, won't be there. App control from Siri, so interoperation between other apps. I can understand this one a little bit more because that requires developer support to build in the intents and things like that into the app control. And then lastly, on-screen awareness, able to understand and take actions with users' content in more apps over time. So are you surprised by any of these?
I think my biggest surprise is what Apple would have been good for Apple to have shown is a line. Here we are today. Here's when things are coming. And maybe they didn't put dates on it, but just show us this sequence that they're coming and just set some expectation. Because I think everybody left that keynote going, oh, I'm going to play with some new Apple goodness. And it's not there. But now nobody seems to know when anything's coming. And they must know when some of it's going to land. So I think they could have done a way better job of going, look, we think it's going to land at this point and this stuff's off in 25. But they didn't really set any expectation. I think that is a bit of a mistake.
I agree with you. I think they fudged, frankly. It was like, all this new cool stuff is coming. But actually, not a lot of this new cool stuff seems to be coming anytime soon. I'm sure some of it will come out in the beta. My feeling is it'll only come to American developers first, based on the fact that it's US English and their limitations around this. And half of me thinks that's okay. You want to be a little bit careful with this AI stuff. We've seen the trouble it can get into with hallucinations and things like that. But I get the impression this is more of a trickle than a torrent, despite what they announce.
Yeah, maybe it's for twofold. I wonder if it's one, front end, make sure it's working, not hallucinating, not get them into hot water. Second fold, we need to scale the back end to make sure that we can meet the demand because you're putting this on a lot of iPhones. So, it's going to be super interesting. I just think Apple just didn't do a great job in the keynote of explaining. They explained, I think, the features quite well. They just didn't explain when anything's coming. And I think a lot of people are confused how some of it all works. I think they could have done a better job.
I agree. Next thing, we talked about RCS in the last podcast. You said it said text message SMS when you were looking at people who'd SMS'd. It's already been slightly cracked, it would seem, by this person, JJ Tech, on Mastodon via a Twitter post. And now you can see in the screenshots it says textmessage.rcs, and they're demoing some of the features that are already there, such as the text bubble, the typing bubbles when people are typing and things like that. So, and tapbacks. So, yeah, looks good.
Cool. No, it does look good. Apple, get it out there. Let's play with it.
Yeah, what are you waiting for? Let's move on past all this nonsense between iMessage and RCS. Good. Apparently, another little thing they're sort of sneaking into the operating system is you'll automatically be prompted to allow passkey upgrades. Now, so you visit a website and and it's turned on by default that allow automatic passkey upgrades will happen. Now, while the security part of me thinks this is good, how much do users actually know what a passkey is and how that will impact them if they lose their device or something? That bothers me a little bit. I don't think they've done a great job of explaining this to a non-technical user. Frankly, as a slightly technical user, I'm a little bit confused by it sometimes, so this worries me slightly.
So I was going to say something similar to you. I think I've not really use passkeys. I probably should be. I'm a security-minded individual. I've got my vaults. I've got all my passwords. They're all unique. I've made sure they're all fantastic rated in one password. I don't know a lot about passkeys, I must confess. So I've not really used them. I know Amazon support them, and I should probably start there. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on this. I think the wider world, like if you said to my partner, "Are you using passkeys?" You'd be like, "Sorry." Do you still log into Amazon with a username and password? She'd be like, "I'll just click a button and it magically takes me in." So I'm kind of with you here. I was in one mind thinking about trying out Passwords app, Apple's one. But in the other mind, I quite like having all my passwords completely separate. And it's quite a thing to move and play with. And I'm a bit confused as to what I'm going to do at the moment, if I'm honest.
I think you went through a trial last year, didn't you? I think you didn't last many days at all before you were back in 1Password.
It lasted about an hour, I think. And then I couldn't edit the URL, I think it was. And I was like, well, that's pointless. So, yeah, I don't know. I think you're right. I think it's probably good they're doing it because users are notoriously bad at updating things. I think most users aren't using this feature. I'd love to see their stats on how many people are using passkeys.
Yeah, I'd agree. And last story for follow-up, there's a little technical article being published by Apple on using iCloud with macOS virtual machines. You might not think this is a very big deal, but when you virtualize macOS on a Mac, you were never able to sign into iCloud, so you could do, as a developer, for example, test messaging, test iCloud integrations, would things break under particular circumstances without it affecting your main machine. It was also cited as a reason as to why virtualization hadn't come to the iPad, because if you couldn't log into iCloud and you couldn't do messages and things like inside of your virtual machine on your iPad, then that would have been a non-starter for having good iPad virtualization. So all those rumors about you can choose at startup on your iPad whether you're going to have Mac or you're going to have iPad would all have been a non-starter without this anyway. So this is, I think it's less interesting because Apple have now indicated they don't want to do any sort of virtualization with iPads. But at the same time, this is a good feature that you'll be able to do that, certainly as a developer. And if you are trying to maintain a very secure version of macOS or whatever reason you might have to run a previous version of macOS that still has functionality, now at least you can have iCloud within that.
So why was it stopped before, though? Was it a technical problem, or was it just licensing?
It was never stopped. It was never enabled because of the is it the T2 chip, the security that's required for a lot of on-device virtualization. So that's why Hackintoshes and things like that had to go through all sorts of things to get messaging and things working, because they didn't have all these kinds of things turned on. But obviously they flipped some bits inside of the virtualization layer to allow this to happen.
Now you've explained that. 100% makes sense. So the T2 was like the secure enclave for an Intel Mac, whereas I think now it is just part of the secure enclave in your I was going to say your A chip, but your M chip, your M1, your M2, etc. So that makes a lot of sense now why they've done that. Okay, that seems good. And I also wondered, part of me, I wonder if this is linked to cybersecurity analysts like testing images as well and, doing all that debugging. And surely it's got to be good for Apple themselves so they can do testing in VMs and things.
Oh, absolutely. The quickest way to get another machine up and running is just to roll out a previously archived virtual machine you've got going. If you want to return to a certain state before you installed something, you use a virtual machine for that. You snapshot your image and you can have it back in milliseconds as opposed to having to wait, 45 minutes, 50 minutes to reinstall macOS because you've screwed something up as a developer. I think it's a great thing. Development with virtual machines is the way to go.
Yep. No, I think we're on the same page. So I think that's it for follow-up.
Yep, a quick one.
Should we dive into the news?
Should we do some news? Let's do some news. So it's AI Corner a little bit this week, which we've tried, like you said, we've tried to pick stories that might have a bit of life in them beyond it being a week or at this point maybe 2 weeks old by the time you read these things. So the first one involves our old friend Elon. This was a story that dropped just after WWDC, or actually on the first day of WWDC, saying he was going to ban all iPhones from Tesla, SpaceX and all of his other companies because putting ChatGPT on them was effectively a security violation. And this amuses me for lots of reasons, really, because Android phones have no ability to access ChatGPT or Google Gemini, do they?
It all seems a bit odd to me, if I'm honest. So Elon obviously, if he's got ChatGPT, we're going to ban it. And he's even gone as far as if visitors come to the office, they're going to have the Apple devices. They have to check them at the door and have to be stored in a Faraday cage. It feels like he's just seen the announcement. He's obviously fallen out with ChatGPT because he was one of the founders of it. He's now doing his own company. It's called XAI, if I remember correctly. So he's doing his thing. He's not happy they're using their thing. But I think if he'd have watched the whole presentation before he started tweeting and then listened to some of the news, the rumours, the follow-up afterwards, he'd realise that actually it's going to integrate with other platforms. Why is he not integrating with XAI? That's a question. Surely him and Tim are friends. They can go and have that conversation. But you're right. Surely you'd be getting all your visitors to check their devices because you scared about what, them recording your voice, which you've been able to do for the last 10, 15 years, or using AI or what? I don't know. It just feels very Elon.
It does feel very Elon. It's a knee-jerk reaction to something that he doesn't fully understand, and every time he does something like this, the whole smartest man in the world thing, the shine comes off that even further, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Look, he's clearly a clever person. You can't deny that, but he just needs to read the room and the news, I think, before making a comment, and then have an informed comment.
I mean, what you say about him being a bit fed up that they're not integrating with his XAI thing, maybe he went to them, or the fact that they didn't approach him to be part of that sort of initial startup was part of it. But why would you when ChatGPT is the 400-pound gorilla in the room that's the well-known thing? Of course Apple's going to integrate with that. And we didn't feature the story that apparently Apple and OpenAI, there's no money changing hands on that. OpenAI are happy to be featured on the device, and Apple apparently aren't paying them anything for the privilege.
I could see that working. Apple get to go, we've got ChatGPT as a backup. OpenAI get to go, we're with Apple. And then off the back of it, I guess, maybe there'll be a link to sign-ups, because it does link to your paid account. If you've got a ChatGPT account, you can hook it up. So maybe that's how it's going to work for them longer term. But very clever on both sides, I think, because it could work for both.
It could. A story worth keeping an eye on anyway, because we'll have to see how Elon jumps. Sticking with AI-based things, and actually we're sort of verging into licensing a little bit as well. Sonos, a company close to my heart, has been not very popular recently because they released a revision to their app that brought all sorts of problems with it. It became a bit harder to do basic things like group speakers together. Speakers wouldn't respond. A lot of the assistance for people who were partially sighted or things like that were dropped out of the app. It was a very confusing update, and to this day it still remains muddled. Apparently the chief executive of Sonos has also put a thing in his out of office saying, or his autoresponder going, I'm not answering any more questions about this because so many customers have bothered him about how dreadful the update is. But alongside of that, last week, and I think this is June the 14th this was dated, they've annoyed even more people by removing a line from their American terms of service where they used to said Sonos does not and will not sell personal information, and that's gone from the American terms of service. So when you sign in next time in America, it presents you with this. Potentially, they will sell your personal information. So that's all your listening data, what you're listening to, what services you're listening with, all that kind of stuff that the Sonos app would be doing, how many speakers you've got in your house, your identity. And yeah, I can understand why people are a bit annoyed about this.
It's a real shame, isn't it? Because it felt like Sonos had weathered the storm of, HomePods turning up, Google, Alexa. It felt like they'd carried on chipping away in the background, just stuck to what they do, make really quality audio products. And they've carried on doing it. And I think they've kept their market base. They've possibly grown it because they certainly seem a lot more popular in more recent years. And yet to do something like this feels like a bit of a home goal. Same with the app, it feels like they've rushed an app out. The CEO putting an autoresponder on. Surely you've got a team of people that deal with that for you. And you can deal with that in a better way than an out of office message. So it does make you wonder a few of the decisions they're making there.
I think, I don't know what I think about this because, as you say, I had come back to Sonos after trying out Apple stuff for a little while. They've just released new headphones, the Sonos Aces, that are expensive but have been very well reviewed. They've got nice features built into them, like if you've got Sonos speakers in the house, such as one of the sound bars under the TV, you can flip on a quiet mode at night and it will transfer all the audio instantly to the headphones instead of, little things like that are just nice quality of life things that only a company like Sonos, in the same way Apple, can integrate because it's got that sort of, ability to work in the home. They make good speakers. They're all well reviewed. They just get better and better. But this, as you say, I think an own goal is the best way of describing it. You're getting all that positive stuff, apart from the app thing, which, they can fix the app, can't they? They can bring back a lot of these things. You'll be able to set timers again. In fact, I think you already can. But then you do something like this, and there's no need for it, really. What are they really going to be able to sell that's of that much value? Is the company struggling that much? As you say, it doesn't seem to be the case.
You'd hope their business model's holding up, surely. I don't know. It just seems a bit odd to me that they do this, but yeah, maybe they come back and and put it back.
And in a similar vein, on June the 6th, Adobe changed their terms and conditions, and this got a lot of traction, actually. I even saw a tweet, well, a toot, but it was referencing a tweet by David Bowie's son, Duncan Jones, who is the director of Moon and a number of sort of really good films, where he logged in the morning, and basically they changed the terms and conditions. They changed it to say, I'll read out. I don't want to read out the whole thing, but basically, they had the rights to redistribute anything that was stored within customers' clouds. So, if you're working on your Adobe Photoshop things, or your Premiere, or your audio things, that now was the property of Adobe, and they could do with it what they liked. That was effectively what the terms of service were changed to say, and you had to agree to that in order to log back into your cloud to do it. So, they were locking away creators' content until they get it. So Duncan Jones went crazy about this. He said no to the change in terms of service and couldn't get any of the content for his next movie. And he said, hey, at Photoshop, what the hell was that new agreement you forced us to sign this morning that locked our app until we agree to it? We're working on a bloody movie here, and no, you don't suddenly have the right to any of the work we're doing on it because we pay you to use Photoshop. What the F***K? So that sort of sentiment was widespread and was really sort of a flash, but then Adobe walked back from that a little bit and said, no, that's not what we meant to do. And the second link in the show notes will say, they've overhauled their terms of service. Say, no, it won't bring AI to work in the customer's work, but talk about an own goal.
Yeah, it's not good, is it? I don't know what. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. There's obviously some boardroom decisions being made, and then when it actually comes to it, it's not been thought through or implemented. You've got your wheelhouse, stay within it, but maybe they were going to do some training with it or license content, but stop it, Adobe. You're here for people to make content. You've got a great name in the industry. Don't ruin it.
I quite often think that some of these decisions are made and they want to say they can get away with it. Maybe nobody will notice, and if they do get away with it, then they can just get on and they've got another revenue stream. So it's literally nobody reads the terms of service, do they? It's probably that sort of attitude, both for Sonos and Adobe, that, yeah, we can probably get away with doing this because nobody really cares. All they want to do is get on and start clicking away in Photoshop.
Yeah, 100%, you're right. I don't ever read them. And like you say, maybe they are chancing their arm a little bit to see what they can do, because all shareholders want to see what's your growth plans. So, and for Adobe, it was obviously acquiring that company, Figma, and that didn't happen. That got stopped. So they've obviously got to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, Figma went to Canva, I think, is where they ended up, as did Affinity Designer. My lights have just come on for those watching the video. So,
is that automated? How do your lights come on?
It's automated. It's my Hue light bulbs.
Fancy. I have to turn mine on with a switch.
It's one of those things. So a special treat for the podcast the viewers. I've suddenly gone very jaundiced looking again.
So we move on to McDonald's.
No, let's not move on to McDonald's because we want to talk about one more Adobe story
my
which
mistake.
is related to that. So the Adobe story that's related to this is that just breaking news before the podcast is that the US Department of Justice is going to sue Adobe, or at least is looking to sue Adobe, because of their aggressive pricing structure. And having suffered from this myself slightly, if you try and cancel your Photoshop subscription halfway through it won't let you. You need to pay a full year subscription. So if you only use it for a month, if you're on the annual price plan, you still got to pay the full year. So getting out of an Adobe subscription is also extremely difficult.
Oh, right, okay. It's not good, is it?
It's really not. It's really a bad look. And I've noticed I've lost the link in the show notes, so that's probably why you don't know why you skipped over the story. But yeah, it's a very poor show on Adobe's part.
Yeah, and like I said, they've got a really good name, and sometimes when you're in charge of a big company like that, the board need to make sure they keep the good name, the good brand equity that they've got, because there are a lot more alternatives to Adobe now than there's ever been.
And they're good as well. So
yeah, agreed.
The article actually says, US sues Adobe for deceiving subscriptions that are too hard to cancel, with the Justice Department alleging that Adobe hid early cancellation fees and trapped consumers in pricey subscriptions. I don't think anybody that pays money for Photoshop would disagree with this. So many creators rely on it for their podcasts, for making their films, for editing their pictures, for Lightroom, for all the sort of extra things that you get with it. And it is a whole ecosystem with, I don't think you're wrong in saying they've got a good name, but how quickly can a brand get tainted? And the first section of this we were talking about with Adobe changing the terms and conditions. If 50 well-paying users went off and checked out Affinity Designer or tried the GIMP and Linux or one of these other alternatives, moved to Final Cut Pro or moved to DaVinci Resolve instead for making their videos, they've lost revenue. And that, it only takes sort of a critical mass of people to start leaving and your product becomes worthless. You have an entirely digital product based on goodwill and a lot of money. If the free or cheaper alternative will do 98% of what you want to do, people will move to it.
Yeah, 100%. And it only takes something like this to open their eyes to go, oh, I wonder what is over there. And then they go and have a look and they're like, oh, I could save myself X amount of dollars per month. So, yeah, it's interesting to see Adobe come up again. That's not good.
Yeah. Go on, now you can tell us about McDonald's chatbot.
Yeah, so, sorry, we were going to move on to McDonald's, everybody's favourite drive-through. So McDonald's are going to stop testing AI to take drive-through orders. I didn't even know this was a thing. I'm assuming it's just in the States because most things seem to start in the States. And then, so if your local McDonald's has been getting your order confidently wrong with an AI chatbot at drive-through, there's good news apparently. So the company's ending the program. The company told franchisees it's winding down AI drive-through ordering, a partnership with IBM, and that's going to be wound down in July. So it's not good, is it? It's not good for IBM to be on there in the press statement as well. That's where you don't want your partnership name to be.
I mean, you can see the appeal for a fast food company where you've got a limited set of items people can order, that if you can stop, a customer service agent at the other end taking the order and sort of being able to ring it up for you, then that's a wage saving, potentially. You could have fewer people working in the restaurants. They could just be slinging the burgers out, sticking them in bags, frying them up on the grills and all that kind of stuff. So I quite like the Verge's writing. Fast food companies are generally hungry for AI, but this seems like a step too far. It's not necessary really, because people have got to still work in the restaurants to do all this kind of stuff. Most of them are wired up with headsets and can take the orders and get on and do other things at the same time. So, and then it makes you look bad, and you're potentially wasting food for something like this as well. And I bet it's ended up costing them more money than saving them anyway.
So it's in 100 restaurants. And they've been doing it since 21. They've announced their partnership with IBM. So that's, good, say 2.5 years, just to be generous. That seems like a long time to then go, we're not going to do it. Like, how did it get to 100 restaurants? You'd have thought there'd be some gating factors. Or maybe they were always promised, it will get better in the next version, and then didn't.
But you know what software development's like? Oh, we'll fix that next time. Oh, we'll fix that. Oh, that's a bug thing. We can fix that. That's no problem. Next week, that'll be sorted, and it goes on, and you scale it up, and you roll it out, and the problems aren't getting better, but the software developer's still saying they're going to improve it, and then they don't. And, it's quite a good call that you can actually go, no, it's not working for us. You're wasting our time. You're wasting our money. You're costing us money. Enough.
Well, it's the bigger, harder decision, isn't it, to pull the plug on something?
Yeah, particularly if it was probably tied to one executive within it who thought this was going to be the next thing. He'd fully drunk the Kool-Aid, as the Americans say, and maybe he got moved on. You don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe they were on the board at IBM as well.
Oh, that's very cynical of you.
Not at all.
Not at all. A good old-fashioned rumor now. Apple are apparently planning redesigned iPhone, MacBook Pros, and Apple Watches that are significantly thinner, following the iPad Pro. I'm not entirely surprised that there might be a refocus slightly on thinness within the company.
I sighed a little then, because sometimes I do look over the room and look at my MacBook Pro and go, she's a bit chunky, but it's a powerhouse. It needs to be. It's got amazing battery, it's got amazing power. Sometimes I look across the room at my iPad Pro and go, she's a bit skinny. I would happily probably have a little bit more battery in there. Give me 15 hours of battery in that iPad. So I don't mind this, but I think the devices, whilst have got bigger, obviously since the iPhone 7s and what have you, and the MacBooks have got a bit thicker too. But I think they're the right dimensions for the tools that they are. That's where I would go. I don't think anybody's screaming for a really thin MacBook Pro. If you want a really thin one, get yourself an Air. That serves that end of the market. So that'd be my view on it. But Apple's going to do Apple. I mean, everything comes in cycles, doesn't it?
I'm a bit conflicted on it. There's definitely some products in the lineup would benefit from a bit of thinness. I'm looking at my Apple Watch Ultra here, and it's a chunky boy. It could be thinner for sure. But the MacBook Pro, I don't mind. I know that it's mostly battery. I want it to be that thick to get the ports and things on it. I don't want stupid things where the volume connector, the headphone connector, for example, on the iMac has to go on the side of the computer rather than the back because it's too long to fit through the computer. I think iPads and phones are handled by humans, therefore they've got to be able to handle, no pun intended, people's hands moving around and bezels, and the fact that you've got to build software things for palm rejection or ignoring accidental touches and things like that is a bit ridiculous. We can cope with having slightly wider bezels on something. It's got to be a usable device, and to me, not that I've handled one of the new iPads, it's almost verging on the worryingly thin, where it looks like I know it's not, it's quite strong, but it looks like it's going to bend to me. I'm quite happy with where the devices are. Now I say that, and then I'll be presented with some ultra thin MacBook Air that's like a sheet of paper, and I think this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. But there's a trade-off for me between, I quite like the satisfying weightiness of a device. When I'm sitting typing on my MacBook Pro, it's reassuring. The keyboard's got the right amount of bounce. It's quite a nice weight in my lap. When it's in my rucksack, I know I've got it with me. I don't want it heavier, but I think it's achieved sort of a nice balance for me.
Yeah, so I was just picking up my 11-inch iPad Pro, which looks tiny, I think, and it is small. But obviously, when I've got the case on it, it's less skinny. But I don't think I want stuff to be as thin as the iPad Pro and take a hit on cooling or battery life. I'd rather have had the iPad Pro that I bought just to be a little bit bigger with a little bit more battery life. There is a balance to be had. I don't think many people are screaming for this. My phone's fine. I don't need a thinner iPhone. Yep. I need a foldy iPhone, please, with a bigger battery.
Yeah, and a foldy iPad. And then, just to reiterate your point there, my iPad Pro is currently out of its case, and you can see the size of the case for the thing. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's extremely weighty as well. So for the purposes of holiday, I've bought like an old folio case, an old style folio case, and it's half the weight. It's almost transformative to me. I remember, oh gosh, iPads are actually quite nice for sticking in your lap and scrolling a bit of content. They're not this massively heavy thing that, frankly, as it's in this case, I'd rather have my laptop.
Yeah, I'm probably going to cover this in a bit at the end of the show when we do Thing of the Week, because I've had a similar experience to yourself.
Good. Okay, two more quick stories then. The first one, and I like to cover the old NHS story. There's still an ongoing cyber hack in London where a lot of inpatient hospital systems, particularly regarding blood results and things like that, have been taken down by this attack. And they've even got medical students rushing around with bits of paper now so they can get urgently required blood results up to wards and things. So this started on the 9th of June, link in the show notes to the BBC article, and it's still ongoing. This hasn't been fixed and could take months to resolve. So I think it's 5 major London hospitals, including ones you've heard of like Guy's and St Thomas and things like that, that have been affected by this hack. I have colleagues who are affected by this hack at some of the hospital sites I work with. This is awful, and so the consequence for actual patient care for things like this, honestly, it's so harmful. We become so dependent on it that we need to harden these public-based systems more significantly than we have. So you haven't got medical students wasting their time doing this. This is patient care that's being directly affected by this. Horrible.
Yeah, so one, you've got to be a pretty horrible ransomware cyber attacker to go after a hospital or any form of care for others. But B, you'd have thought after the NHS got hit with WannaCry back in 2017, I think, if memory serves, because I remember going through that experience. I had to deal with it where I worked at the time. You'd have thought they'd be, really robust because they've got bitten, and that's the best time if you need to get funding and learn from it and harden your defences and make all the right cybersecurity decisions. So it's a bit embarrassing they've been hit again. It's bad all round, and the longevity of how long it's going to take them to resolve it and get back up and running properly is worrying as well, as if the NHS wasn't overstretched enough.
Yeah, it's horrible. Apparently it's been linked to a Russian group of cyber criminals using the dark web. They've done this a couple of times before. There is a ransomware component to it, but the UK government won't pay ransomware for these kinds of things, and it seems like they're just going to accept if these criminals leak the data onto the web, then that, which is presumably patient data, they're just going to have to accept that for the purposes of not paying the fine. And I understand it in this case. It shouldn't have happened. You would hope you'd hard enough systems to do it, but in a big, flexible organisation like the NHS, which has so many suppliers, has to work with so many different components, has so many bits of software that have to work together in order to do it. It's a really difficult thing to harden. So I have an awful lot of sympathy for the IT guys that are involved in this kind of stuff, and not a lot of sympathy for the Russian criminals who are attacking and directly affecting patient care.
Yeah, I'm with you on this, and that is not a job I'd want to be in the NHS right now, trying to repel this attack. It's got to be challenging. They're going to have their budgets probably been cut year on year, so it's a hard problem. They've got a very distributed estate.
They certainly do. And the worry is, of course, for the broader NHS. Anyway, a story worth keeping an eye on, and maybe we'll report on it if and when it's actually fixed. And our last story for news, and I just thought this was an interesting one. So this is a proposal in America, from the Surgeon General, no less, that social media apps should be badged like tobacco. They could be harmful to your health. This feels like old man shouts at cloud to me.
Yeah, it's an odd one, isn't it? Because at what point do you stop badging stuff like tobacco? What about alcohol? What about high sugary drinks? Just to name the non-techie stuff. What about the whole of the internet could be badged? So it's a tricky one. I do think children need more education on it. It's been quite interesting with my son, and obviously he had a phone last year, and sometimes he gets a text message from somebody he doesn't know, and it's obviously where they've recycled the phone number that he's got. And so he had one from a car company the other day saying that he needs to get his car checked. He's like, what do I do with this? And so you just need to block it. It's just where the phone's been used. But he didn't know what that meant. And there's lots of things like that. It's like going on the internet, and it's like, boys, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Not all of it will be true. So I don't think this is the problem. I don't think people aren't cautious enough because there isn't a label on it. I think this is more of an education when they're young, and you could say it for the whole of the internet or just walking out into the world. You've got to give these children the tools to deal with it.
I don't think I can add to that. I think you've said that very well. Sticking a label on Instagram to say, this could harm your mental health isn't going to stop anyone, children, adult, ever, from wanting to see the content of the new dance or whatever it is that they're looking at that for. So education is the route to the solution to this problem, not just sticking a label on it.
Agreed.
Media?
Let's do media.
Quickest media section ever. I haven't watched it yet, but the new episode of House of the Dragon, episode 1 of season 2 came out last night, so I'm really quite excited to get 5 minutes to watch that. Whether I'll get actually a chance to do so, I don't know. I don't think you partook of Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, did you?
Completely missed all of it. Is this something you're going to be downloading to take on the aeroplane with you?
If I can figure out a way to do so, then yes. Obviously, everything I watch is entirely legal and within the right bounds. So who knows? Maybe it'll be featured on the airplane. But I think this is interesting. The season 1 of House of the Dragon was fantastic. There were some amazing actors in there, particularly Paddy Considine as the king. Within that, I don't think he'll feature in this one. I can't remember. I need to bring me back up to speed on what happened in season 1. It's been a while since I watched it, but this is a far more understandable world than the one presented in Game of Thrones, and a lot more approachable as well, I think. Well, it is still the Game of Thrones world, but it's a prequel.
Right, okay. And then where do you go to, if I wanted to watch this, where do I go? Is it like on Disney Plus or Netflix?
I think it's Now TV.
Now TV, okay, fine. So it's Sky here in the UK then. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's doable. Right.
And HBO in the States.
Yeah, which I never really get why we don't get HBO over here. I don't know. I always find that odd. It's the same with Hulu.
Media licensing deals. So yeah, if you have the ability to do so and you're a fan of season 1, season 2 has started now, featuring Matt Smith and others, and it's a great show and you should be watching it.
Understood.
Games?
Yeah, I haven't watched any media. I've watched some football. That's probably all I've done since we last met. And to be fair, the coverage, amazing. That they've been all around the world. They're in Germany playing the Euros here in the UK. And it was great to watch our home team play and a few others. I'm only into it because my son's into it, and it's nice to watch something with him. So I would just comment that it's really good coverage. It's just annoying. Some matches are on the BBC, some are on ITV in the UK. So whichever app you pick to watch a match, you usually got the wrong one. You've got a 50-50 chance.
I have no comment about football. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I know it's one of those things where I think I'm glad people are having fun watching it, but it leaves me kind of cold, really. But I'm glad you enjoyed watching with your son. It's quite nice to watch something sporting with people who
he'll watch a bit of Formula 1 with me. I'll watch a bit of football with him. We just humour each other, I think.
Seems fair. One game story?
Go on then, one game story. So Microsoft reveals its first diskless Xbox Series X. I thought the Xbox Series X was diskless.
The black one
Yep.
had a Blu-ray drive.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that. There you go.
So the Series X is the high-end one. Unlike the PlayStation, they have a Series X and a Series S. The Series S has less storage and isn't 4K compliant for gaming. It's sort of 1440p thereabouts, so like slightly higher than HD, but not for the 4K. So if you want the absolute best Xbox, you get the Series X. I don't know how many people would actually notice it, but it's a little bit more expensive. It's effectively quite a high-end NVIDIA card that's in it, and as a consequence of that, it came with a Blu-ray drive as well. Microsoft got a lot of criticism about 10 years ago, I think, just with the PlayStation, I want to say 3.
No,
maybe 4.
you've just conflated Microsoft and PlayStation.
No, I haven't.
Oh, sorry.
I'm getting there. No, I haven't. I'm getting there. They got a lot of flack, I think, with the PlayStation 4, because the PlayStation 4 left its drive in, and Xbox was going to launch the One X without any drives at all, and gamers went mental. How dare you take our drives away from us? You can pull them out of our cold dead hands. So I think when Microsoft launched the Series X, it was a conscious decision to leave the drive in, so they wouldn't have the same sort of thing. Where Sony were always smugly going, we've got drives. You can still buy drives in all our devices. Of course, now with PlayStation 5, they don't necessarily have drives in, and they've finally done this to the high-end Xbox as well. So I haven't conflated. This is just full circle now for them. Something they started a few years ago.
Yeah, I must confess, I've got 2 PS5s, one with and one without a drive. Still haven't used the drive in the one with. I kind of got it because I thought it would replace the Blu-ray player, and occasionally there's a film I want to watch and I can't buy it digitally. So, and it was like £40 to have it, so I thought I'd get it. Okay, great. They're still doing the Series X, I guess. So it feels like PS5 and Xbox are going to carry on this year. Are we expecting any? We're not expecting any announcements this year. Are we kind of mid to late cycle? I don't know.
Switch 2 is all we're expecting, right?
If Nintendo are the only one to announce a console this year, they've nailed the timing, haven't they? Because they get the whole year, whenever they announce this, assume September, they've got all the media to themselves on it because there's no new exciting hardware to talk about. So it's great timing on their part.
It's great timing, but I kind of feel if you were to ask PlayStation or Xbox people if they had another console, the chances are it's going to be a Switch as well, so it might not matter.
True, but if there's a Switch 2 coming out and you want people's eyeballs and money, announce it when they're not spending it on other stuff.
You've got a PlayStation and a Switch, Chris.
I've got a PlayStation, Switch, and a Steam Deck, and a Playdate. Yeah, this is the thing, though. This is why I'm a bit put off buying the Vision Pro, because you end up with all these devices. Like, which one do I pick up? Which one do I take with me? Because you can't take them all.
It's a lot of distraction. That was it for games, unless I missed something.
No, unless you want to talk Gran Turismo.
I don't want to talk Gran Turismo. Let's move on and do main show. So this will be a slightly odd one, I think, with me talking for a long time, and then we'll just have a general discussion. So for a long time, I've been talking about Linux, and I thought it might be worth recapping a little bit by what we mean by Linux. And Linux is an operating system, which won't surprise anybody. It's an open source Unix-like operating system. And what I mean by Unix-like, and feel free to stop me in a minute, Chris, and ask me a question, is in the 1960s when computing was sort of really beginning to find its feet in terms of large mainframes, and you had IBM and DEC and VAX and all these companies beginning to spin up operating systems. All of them were slightly interoperable using an operating system called Unix, which had particular system calls, and everything was a file and a particular way of managing things. And Unix was the dominant high-end operating system that was in use in computing around the world. I think that's accurate. Would you agree with that?
No, I'd go with everything you've said. You're probably doing a better job than I would have explained in the history.
So when it came to microcomputers, and obviously, in the 80s we had Macintosh and we had Altair and we had eventually the IBM PC and Windows, and all these things would come along to take advantage of the hardware that was there. There was still very much a desire to have Unix-like operating systems on the new home computers as they came along. You and I both did this in university, so I remember it quite well. There's a very famous author of operating systems books called Andrew Tannenbaum, and he developed an operating system called Minix to teach computer science students how Unix-like operating systems worked. And one of the people learning this, slightly before our time in 1991, was a Finnish software developer called Linus Torvalds. And he didn't like the fact that Minix was restricted just for educational use only, and wanted something that was more general purpose that he could take and run on his x86-based computer, effectively. So Linus wrote his own version of Unix or a Unix-like operating system, a Minix-like operating system that could replicate a lot of those Unix system calls and have the same sort of philosophy about it, and called it Linux. Lin being the first three letters of his name, and UX for the Unix side of it. He felt this was quite vain. If you go and look him up on Wikipedia, you'll see he didn't want to call it that. He wanted to call it EasyOS or something else instead, but was kind of persuaded to do so.
I think Linux is a good name. Do you not? Like, it just sounds cool.
It does sound cool. It's really good, and it's very much part of Linus or Linus, depending on if you're more American. I think he's Finnish, so I presume he's Linus. Linus Torvalds. And launched this thing, and more importantly, he made it open source, and that was sort of the crucial element of this. Is it was freely available in the early days of the internet, and floppy disks that you could download and make use of it. You weren't breaking any laws, and you had a Unix-like experience on your home computer. Is that a decent summary up to 1991?
Yeah, it's like the home user version of Unix, isn't it? That's kind of it. But obviously, by home user, I mean probably back then, very much the computer scientist home user.
Very much. And you learn a lot because it's such a particularly then, it was such a low-level operating system that people could get in, they could hack around with it, they could mess with it, and they could update it and publish those changes back up the tree towards Linus and the developers that started on it, and you could always improve the operating system. So we know that hardware changes frequently, you have new things coming along, things don't work, and these developers who were developing Linux and submitting back to it could have all those improvements to the hardware feature in the next version of the operating system as it came along. So that brings us kind of to today, and Linux is by most measures probably the most popular operating system in the world.
Would you say?
Bold statement.
It's a bold statement.
Bold statement, but I'm going to back it up.
Okay.
Because if you think of Android, if you think of web servers, if you think of web services and databases and all these kinds of things, as servers, that's pretty much what they run. Now, of course, there's Windows servers running Azure and all these things as well, but I almost guarantee that there is more Linux-based operating systems running around the world than there are Windows. Even if it's 51-49%, I'm not talking about on the desktop, but I'm talking in general, in bulk. The embedded thing running your greetings card is probably running a version of Linux.
Yeah, it's kind of like the operating system behind the scenes, isn't it? It's like BlackBerry is in lots of car dashboards, but nobody knows about it, kind of thing. So, okay, I can get behind.
So, Linux, as I said, is an operating system. What do I mean by that? Well, an operating system is the bootloader, so how the operating system starts off. It's the kernel, which is how it talks to devices, the disk, the memory, the CPU, the GPU. And on top of that sit small programs called daemons or daemons in Linux or Unix speak, and they deal with server processes. For things like printing, scheduling jobs, all that kind of stuff. And ultimately on top of that, so you can think of these as layers going up from starting it to the kernel to the daemons, so you get to, when we think about desktop operating systems, the Windows server and then the environments that sit on top of those. So Windows has a similar thing. It has the Windows kernel, and on top of that sits the Windows itself. Mac OS has FreeBSD, which is also a Unix-based operating system, and on top of that sits the Mac OS Windows server, of the name which I forget. It used to be called AC. What I think I've done there is I've brought us up to speed on what I mean by an operating system and what the levels of the operating system are and where Linux sits within that. Did all that make sense? Any questions about any of that?
It did make sense. Sorry, I was going off to find out what macOS Windows server is. But you're right. I mean, the operating system, we kind of take it for granted. It deals with everything. Is, like you say, it's multi-layered, and it goes all the way up to the GUI, which is the bit that everybody uses and interacts with. But they maybe don't appreciate everything else it's doing, dealing with all the inputs and outputs and, displaying a picture on the screen whilst you're plugging in a keyboard and mouse and pushing keys on the keyboard. It's got to handle all of that and run programs at the same time, multiple programs at the same time, and does all that on our phone. And I guess Apple really got it right when they did the phone, in that they miniaturized it all and actually made a full-blown computer in your phone, but actually took loads of what you would think of as being a computer away from the user, all the managing of memory and ejecting drives and so on and so forth. So, no, I think you've done a really good job.
Thank you. And of course, you don't have to have the Windows on top of it. A lot of these server operating systems, where you connect to them, just look like, for Mac OS users, like the terminal, look like a console, look like a command prompt on Windows. And for many server administrators, that's good enough. You can do lots of things on the terminal. It's very flexible, and I think that's been one of the biggest knocks against Linux and Unix-based operating system is you need a bit of kung fu, the ability to know what's going on with the terminal, and you can do almost everything you could probably do more than you can do with a Windows operating system or a Windows paradigm with a terminal, but you kind of need to know what you're doing. The development of macOS, the original macOS, really did put a flag in the sand for usability and brought it to normal users or everyday users, where they didn't need to be able to hack around in a terminal and know what a VT was, or all the various things that you had to be a high priest of computing to understand. It brought it to the everyday person where they could get a concept of what a document was, because that was like a piece of paper and you could write on it like a word processor, and you could print it and go over your Adobe style writer and pull it out. So that really signaled the change between actually having to know how a computer did start up and what a bootloader was and how you interacted with the kernel, and abstracted the user away from that. And that's where the desktop was truly born. Windows ran with it, obviously, and that kind of left Linux behind in a sense. It took them a lot longer to get to the point where they had desktops as we would think of them as Mac users, as Windows users. They had them, they always had them, but they were less sophisticated and they weren't essential. People would always dive back into the terminal because that's where the roots of the operating system came from, and I think that's fair to say as well.
Yeah, I think they struggled, didn't they? Because you had macOS running on devices that were made by Apple, really easy to use. And Apple had really gone a long way from making the interface really intuitive and drag and drop, and you used to drag your disk to eject it, whereas that wasn't really on Linux. Whereas Microsoft kind of did try to do similar things to make it easy, but they also made their operating system work on hundreds of different devices, thousands of devices, and they went down that avenue. And whereas Linux, kind of in the middle, just struggled, I think, really. There wasn't really a market for them, and it was just Apple and Microsoft. Like, most people probably haven't heard of Linux.
Yeah, without realizing that it runs on their Android phone and all that kind of stuff. And that's fair to say, because it still has that aura of complexity around it as well. And that's not unjustified. It's not as straightforward as to just stick Windows on your computer or go and buy a Mac with that on that. You do have to make a little more effort to get it up and running. I mean, we'll find out if that's still true, because you haven't installed Linux in a very long time. And I think, we might have some experience of that going on. But it's vastly better than it was back in the 90s the early 2000s when you and I were doing this through university, and all the sort of hoops you had to jump through to get that up and running. So I'm going to finish my sort of history of Linux by saying this has been made easier by what's called distributions. So these have existed for a long time. There's one called Red Hat. It's probably one of the most famous ones, which takes a lot of these Linux concepts of the bootloader and the kernel and all the rest, and then packages it together with bits of software, and that becomes known as a distribution. So the Red Hat distribution was actually largely responsible from a guy from Swansea who did Swansea University Computer Science Labs, who wrote the original networking layer for Linux. And when you'd watch the boot process for Linux back in the day, it would actually say from Swansea University Computing Society, which always gave me a little thrill in my heart when I'd see Alan, I can't remember his surname, Alan something, who started Red Hat, and he was seen on campus with his red fedora, and that's where Red Hat software came from. So it's nice to throw a little bit of Swansea back into this mix as well.
No, I didn't know that either.
There you go, you see, and you went to the university. So the sort of Red Hat, and then there were a couple of other distributions that sort of popularized bringing all these things together under this sort of one banner. So there was Red Hat, there was Debian, and a couple of others as well back in the day. There was Mandrake, which was sort of similar, and SUSE in Germany did the same sort of thing.
Which I do think is a little off-putting for people, because if you want to get in it, it's like, well, which one do I need? And I must be honest, I probably faltered there because I was like, I don't know where to start, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's fair, because it was confusing, and which one do you pick, and what do you mean by a package manager, and all this kind of stuff. But I'm going to step back from that a little bit. Debian, which is short for Deb and Ian, who started the distribution way back when, and Debian is responsible as sort of the fundamental layer. Of course, it uses the Linux kernel. The distribution typically comes with a package manager. That package manager is how you get software on and off your computer. So think of it as a web server where you go to say, now I need a text processor, or now I need an audio recording program or something like that. That's maintained by the distribution. It has a package manager called apt, APT, and that package manager and Debian itself are actually responsible for the beginning of the popularization of Linux. So Ubuntu, which is probably one of the best known commercial distributions of Linux, and Mint, which is what I encourage you to install, are based on Debian. So they make use of the apt packaging manager, and they sort of package it up themselves very nicely. And we're at the point really where there's the Red Hat version of this, which is called RPM, Red Hat Package Manager. There's the Debian one, apt, and then there's Arch, which is another Linux distribution which uses AUR. And they're the sort of three primary ones. There are, of course, others, because it's Linux. There's 4 trillion of these kinds of things. But a distribution based on one of those things are probably where you're going. And other than that, sort of technicality between them, for a desktop user or even a server user, you get to a point where you've got your prompt, you pick your windowing environment, of which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, but you end up with something that looks a bit like a Mac. Use the GNOME window environment, something that looks a bit like Windows, the KDE or Plasma environment, or Mate or Cinnamon, which are sort of older variants of that. So if you didn't like where they went with Windows 10, for example, Mate or Cinnamon will give you something that looks a bit more like Windows 7 with a start menu at the bottom left and all that kind of stuff, and GNOME looks like. So you've kind of got that flexibility, and that's really what Linux is. It's flexibility to find what you're happy with and stick with it, and the chances are it'll work. So that kind of brings us to where we are with desktop Linux, I think.
I think it was good. Yeah, I guess I am still confused in all the different flavors, and we'll go into that with my experience in a minute. But I think it was a good overview of where we're at. There is a lot of choice out there, which is quite a good thing in a way, because some people want choice.
Some people want choice, and the open source way is, well, I'm not using the standard, I'm going to create it again, and because they don't like something or they fell out, and that's why you get a lot of forks and splits in open source software, because it is open. You can just download the code, and you think, well, I didn't like the way they did that, and they start their own version of it, and that sort of adds to the confusion. But fundamentally, the kernel, the Linux kernel and the bootloader, is the same across all of these things. Linus still maintains it. Amazingly, after all these years, he's still the final decision on what makes it into a release and it goes out. And he's got a flock of people around him now who help him with that. But Linus Torvalds still makes these decisions about it. And that's incredible for an operating system that's now the scale that it is.
Yeah, it is impressive that one person's still going all these years, but you hope he has got help.
He has got help, and you see that. And I think he's still as brutally honest with people as he always has been. He had a certain reputation.
Right, okay. So where are we going next? We're going into your world?
We'll go into my world a little bit. So this won't surprise anyone, given my dabbling with Android and all the rest of it, and the fact I fancy myself as being okay with computers, that I like to fiddle with these things, and open source appeals to me. As Apple becomes ever more abstract and further away from what users want and is more about what Apple does, I'm always curious to see if can I get by a day using what's an open source operating system. So I had a goal last Friday of, can I do a day's work in Linux? So my old Windows machine here, which is no longer has Windows on it in any way, I have installed Debian Linux. It's the current version 12, which is called Bookworm. All Debian distributions are named after characters from Toy Story, which I thought might appeal to you. So the unstable branch of Debian is called Sid, for example, who was the nasty kid who tried to break all the toys. I think he ended up as a bin man in Toy Story 3. That's the unstable one.
I can definitely get behind that naming convention. I like it.
Yep. There was Sarge, there is Sarge, which is the one that's going to become stable in Bookworm next, and that's the way they name their operating systems. So I really like that, sort of that harken back to Toy Story. So I've installed Debian Linux 12. It's actually kind of 12.5. Don't get too hung up on the version numbers. It boots in about 20 seconds from the point to turn it on, which is more than enough when you're trying to go on and do things. It has an NVIDIA graphics card in it. For those who follow Linux stuff, typically NVIDIA haven't been the best customers in the Linux world. They haven't open sourced their drivers in the way that AMD have, so you can get sort of low-level understanding of what's going on in the operating system. Typically, AMD was thought of as better, but actually they're slightly better these days. They produce more things, and with a couple of terminal commands, I was able to get my proprietary graphics card up and running, and it now works flawlessly. I have 100 hertz, which is the maximum my screen will allow me to do at the resolution I wanted to run at. So graphics are fine, the sound is fine, everything works as you expect it to do. I picked the Mate, it's not Mate, it looks like Mate desktop, which is what you'll have had if you managed to get Mint up and running. I quite like that one. I'm not a big fan of the GNOME or GNOME environment because it doesn't allow you to do window minimizing. I quite like that. I've got used to that from my Mac going to the dock and from Windows from back in the day, so it kind of annoys me. Gnome kind of wants everything full screen all the time. A bit more like a more modern Mac user might want, and there are subtleties, and you can install plugins to stop it doing that. I don't like it very much. It's also not very good for me, Gnome this is, at showing you what's running in the background. It kind of just expects you to know what's going on, and I don't like that either. So Mate and KDE fit my needs a little bit better, and it works quite well. For working with documents, which in my case is PowerPoint or Word or Excel sheets, I installed LibreOffice. I was so impressed with LibreOffice. I haven't used it in anger in a very long time, and its integration or its ability to collaborate just as Word documents was spectacular. I think that reviewing, which we do a lot as university types, where people make changes to documents and you accept it or you reject it or you put in comments, is better than Words. It was very straightforward to do that kind of stuff. The font support was really good as well. And I really liked the first launch experience when, do you want it to look like Word used to look? So back in the day with lots of menus and buttons and things, or do you want the tabbed look? And it immediately stuck to that, and you can say, I want it across it, or I just want it in this. Again, the flexibility and customizability of this is just so impressive. Like I say, reviewing documents was even better than Word. Shall I take a break? Have you got a question, or shall I just fire on?
No, it is interesting. I do wonder though, what's the compatibility like? Does it open docx's and you can edit and go file save as? Because what always slightly worries me is when I send it to the other person, are they going to have any problems?
Well, I did that, and I didn't tell anyone I was in Linux for the day. So I got a very technical academic paper with lots of comments on it, lots of review changes. It was a docx. I opened it in this. I saved it back as a docx, and off it went. So it will try and save it in the document format in which you received it, and you can go into the settings and say just save everything as docx's, or you can use LibreOffice's own document, which is ODF, I think is the format for that. But yeah, no problems with compatibility there at all.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because that's been my concerns historically.
Wasn't an issue. I used Firefox for the web browser because I like Firefox. From there I logged into Office 365, which is our university environment for my email and calendaring, so I didn't install an email client or calendaring thing like Outlook. I decided to stick to the web. I think there are better choices for this coming within some of the Linux email clients, but I didn't want to go down that route. I figured that Office on the web is good enough. You get set tonal alerts for emails coming in. You can move around. I could access OneDrive and do all that kind of stuff from within the web browser, so that was as far as I went with that. On top of that, I installed Zoom directly from Zoom themselves, Slack directly from them themselves, used the built-in VPN to it, used a remote desktop and work, and I used Reminder for my remote desktop, and that was just to a straight RDC connection, remote desktop connection, as I would in Mac or Windows, and it all just worked.
That is quite cool. That you can just install it, crack on, and works, because historically Linux has been more of a you got some work to do to make everything work. It's not quite that straightforward.
Other than 2 terminal commands to get my graphics driver to work, and frankly, if I hadn't and I wasn't bothered about getting the maximum refresh rate, everything would have worked without that anyway. I didn't actually need to do that, other than the fact I'd ultimately want to try playing some games on it. But all of that stuff allowed me to get on and do a day's work, and nobody knew any better. And that's quite impressive, I think.
Well, I think that's really telling, isn't it? If you can work on, a different platform and nobody knows, then you've worked. It means that it is our parity feature set, I guess, with other platforms that you pay good money for.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions about that, other than me going, yeah, I've done it? But I think it's quite important for
Would you use it
listeners.
more often? Why are you going to keep on your Mac or your Windows device?
Well, I only use Windows because I have to remote into it at work. That's my exposure to Windows. Okay. And then I'm under an enterprise agreement and all the stuff that comes along with that. So I'm connecting to Windows rather than using Windows. And I'm okay with that because that's the corporate policy. You talk about your corporate policy within your company quite a lot as well. That's ours. For doing these kinds of things, we've got that. And I hope we wake up a little bit and move away from that. But it's fine. I can live with it for now. I can do 90% of my job without having to connect to it because, like you, a lot of my job is really these days running meetings and writing documents and doing all that kind of stuff rather than hardcore coding and analysis. But so that's fine. Our hardcore coding and analysis is done with open source tools as well. Largely we use R and Python and things like that to do that. So it's fine. I think should Microsoft ever get really particularly bad, I think the university would be able to flip over quite easily and continue to carry out most of its functions. Certainly, we as researchers could. And it's interesting. The market penetration of Linux for researchers is huge because a lot of these tools for AI-based things, machine learning models, all that kind of stuff, are all based on Linux and then a programming language like Python built on top of that. So that was fine. The Mac is nicer, I will say, for my familiarity with it. I can be very productive very quickly in a Mac because I've been using it for such a long period of time. You've got, and it's about apps as much as the Mac desktop for me. So if you're doing something like, I'm trying to think of an example now. I can't even say DaVinci Resolve because that works on Linux too. But like the OmniGraffle apps, for example, the OmniGroup apps are very slick, well-made things that is very quickly to get on. All the apps of a week I tend to feature have got that little bit of shine, which you can have. You don't have the shine in Linux, but you do have the functionality. So I think it might be habit as much as anything else that sort of keeps me there. And the hardware. So Mac laptop hardware is impeccable with very long batteries that are very performant that let me get on and do it. So habit, hardware are probably the only things keeping me there. And I'm trying to work on both.
No, I get it. It's hard to change habits. Behavioural change isn't easy. We know that. So I'm not surprised. No, I was just curious because, we're going to talk about me in a minute, but it just sounded like you had a really good experience. And actually, if you didn't want to support corporate America, this could be a way of doing it. But I think you are right. Apple's hardware is impeccable. No matter which device you pick, they've got amazing hardware. But I guess you could always run it on a VM on your Mac. That I guess is an option too. But no, it sounds quite good that you're up and running, and like LibreOffice sounds way more featured than I'd expected it to be.
Yep. So that was my experience, and it was quite nice. You're kind of sticking it to the man as well as being able to work to the man. That all these things do just work, and it costs you £0 and 0 pence other than for the hardware that you've ponied up, and you've kind of got the reassurance, except when I'm interacting with Microsoft's apps, that it's not watching me. It's not recording my keystrokes. It's not doing all those things. It has been vetted by people. And that's quite a nice feeling.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, Microsoft's not going to be vetting you anymore, though, are they? Because they've pulled that features we talked about last time.
It's still in Windows 11, isn't it? The keystroke logger and all that kind of stuff on the home versions of the operating system.
Yeah, I just find it all a bit... Yeah, I'm not liking where they're going. But no, it does sound really good. I didn't even realise Firefox was a thing on Linux either. So, I've learned quite a bit today, I think.
Right, tell us about your experience then. Chris installed Linux Mint.
Yeah, so after you nagged me, I installed Linux Mint. But I must confess, though, before I'd even started, I had questions. I thought I'd persevere on my own. So we had, which distribution? You told me to install Linux Mint, so I went with that. So you made my mind up there, but there would have been a question there. But when I go to the Linux Mint download page, which I need to go back to now, there's now 3 versions I can pick. I can pick the Cinnamon Edition, the XFCE Edition, or the Mate Edition. Did you use Mate? I think Mate. Or there's an Edge one right down the bottom as well. So instantly I was like, I don't know. So I went for the Cinnamon Edition because it was at the top of the page. So I assume that's the one for most people. So I downloaded that. I plugged a drive into my Mac, and it did give me a link to download a tool to make my USB drive bootable on the laptop I was going to use for it, so I could easily install it on that. So I did all of that. And that was quite straightforward. It installed it. That worked fine. I had to go and turn something off in the BIOS, which may confuse a few people. But I got Linux on there. But you know what? When I first booted up Linux, it was so easy. It was straight on the Wi-Fi. It installed everything. The graphics worked. The drivers worked. Adjusting the brightness on the keyboard worked. Everything just worked, which last time I used Linux would not have been the case. Firefox installed by default. Strange icon. Kind of like an orange ball sort of icon, which I didn't realise was Firefox to begin with. But I had LibreOffice on it. I haven't played with LibreOffice though, I must confess. So I was having a root round. Needed lots of things updating, which you often get with a software release. But on the whole, I was amazed how they've gone down the softening route so that you didn't need too much insider baseball to get up and running and to use it. And it's very familiar if you've used Windows or Mac in recent times. But yeah, really easy to do. I was quite impressed with their app store. I think it was Software Manager. because you could just fire that up and go off and search for anything you wanted. So I just typed Steam in, but then I had 3 options of Steam to install, and I was like, oh, I don't know which one to pick. I'll pick the one with the most reviews and the highest star ratings, because there's lots in there. Installed Steam, and that all worked. Logged in. Should have probably installed 1Password, but I just went and got my password off my device. But that was super easy, and I installed Steam, and I then did the thing that you told me to do to make it play the games I could play on my Steam Deck, and then I could play all my Windows games on a Linux PC for free, and it all just kind of worked. It was actually super easy, and I was genuinely impressed with how easy Linux Mint is just to get up and running and use. Could I use it day to day? Probably. Battery life probably would be a bit less than my iPad, but yeah, if my company supported it, I would be up for testing it, but I can't do that.
That's interesting. I'm particularly interested that you didn't. There's a couple of things there, isn't there? Installing any operating system from scratch isn't easy. Even installing a Windows operating system from scratch isn't easy, because there's questions about partitioning and boot managers and all that kind of stuff that Windows asks you. And also, every Windows I've ever installed, it then sits there going, I don't know what graphics cards you've got. I can't work your sound card. I don't know anything about your keyboard shortcuts. Go to the manufacturer of this driver, download this thing, and install it. And it's better for Windows 11, but it's still a thing. But it is still a thing that you've immediately got to go off and find this X. And that is a really impressive thing about Linux, that, it all just, as you say, most of the time just works, on relatively well-known hardware, and presumably you installed it on some old Dell laptop or something like that. It found all those things, and it did it, and so it was a laptop, it could work out, it was a battery, all the things, the Wi-Fi just worked, all that kind of stuff. And like you say, back in the day, that would not have been a thing. And again, the software choice is slightly confusing once you're there, but you have got that software choice. You're not going to the Windows store and seeing all those adverts for X, Y, and Z. You've gone off to look for that. Yeah, I'm quite impressed, actually. And you found all the disk partitioning and all that kind of stuff was straightforward. Just click next, 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 did you?
Yeah, super easy. The only thing that marginally annoyed me on the installer was it joined the Wi-Fi first, and then after I joined the Wi-Fi, it then checked my BIOS and said, you need to go change something in the BIOS. So you had to reboot. And then when we make that change, you go back through the installation. You then have to rejoin the Wi-Fi again. And I was like, you should just swap those screens around. But no, on the whole, it was just so easy to get up and running with very little knowledge. And I probably haven't tried Linux in like natively in 10, 15 years. It's been a long, long time. But the amount that came pre-installed, all the drivers were there, very easy to update. And like I say, that you need to be less techie these days to get it up and running. Firefox was on those, because I was like, where's the web browser? And I was like, oh, it's Firefox, brilliant, it's installed by default, it's not some unknown thing called Conqueror or whatever it may be that you've never really heard of. No, I just thought it was all really good, and actually could be quite easily used by the wider public, I guess.
Did you try Command and Conquer?
I didn't try Command and Conquer. I tried Portal 2 because it wasn't a very big download, and I thought I'd try a game by Valve to begin with, because surely theirs will support it. And then I played it Commandos, Behind Enemy Lines, which is an old 90s game, and I just downloaded it. It was only about a gig, whereas Command Conquer was more like 20 odd gig, and it worked fine. Just off I go. The sound worked, the audio worked. It was just, like I say, remote, really straightforward, way more than I was expecting it to be. So yeah, pretty impressed.
That's good. And like you say, I mean, next time you've got a family member with an old computer who's like, oh, it's not supported, Windows 12 isn't supported, or this kind of thing, then you've actually got a bit of insight to go, actually, the programs you need to run, you need to write a web browser that's up to date, that's going to keep you secure in the house, and to run these old programs that you've always run. Now you know there's a facility to do that in a relatively straightforward way. So I think they're doing a hell of a job, actually, aren't they?
It's impressive, like I say, how easy to use it was, and very straightforward, and just worked. So that a lot's happened in the time since I've last used it. They've done loads, and it's really good. And like I say, it looked nice. It was generally quite pleasing on the eye, so I wouldn't be offended if I had to use it all day.
There you go. It's your first step into a wider world.
Agreed. Yeah, no, it was good. I enjoyed it. It was something different to do at my lunch break today.
Excellent. Good. All right. Well, are you going to continue to tinker? Maybe put it in front of the boys and see if they notice?
Yeah, I've left it there. Well, we've got a Raspberry Pi as well with PiOS. I don't know what they call it. PiOS? Raspbian. So we have got that on the go as well on another device. So they are trying different things out slowly.
So just to finish the thought off here, the Pi is an interesting case where, once again, that's Debian, which your Mint is based on fundamentally. It uses the same apt package manager that I mentioned a while ago. So skills they learn on a Raspberry Pi are immediately transferable to the same, the underlying operating system that's Mint, which is really quite cool.
Yeah, and they just need general skills at their age. They're so young. They just need to understand some of the general basics, which a lot of people don't know these days because computing has been smoothed out for a lot of people with how phones work and what have you.
And I do think that's a problem that you and I, possibly more me slightly these days than you, have a fundamental understanding of how computers work, how they come together, how they launch, things like very long instruction sets and all that kind of stuff that you just sit in processors and all the rest of it. And that we did computer science degrees, but tinkerers of computers used to know this stuff back when Linux was being written, because they had to in order to get them up and running. And I worry that we lose a lot of those skills through dumbing down computing. And at some point, for some people, there is a break where they go, I don't know how to do that, and they stop. And I don't want to get too far away from that, because my daughter's experience of installing R on her Mac for her university computer, that was a world away from what she was familiar with. And to do real work on computers, you do need a little bit of understanding about it. It's not just go to the App Store and find the thing that does it for you. Although ChatGPT may change that. But I do think we need to maintain some sort of understanding of how they work.
I think you're right. You are definitely a lot closer to it than I am. Just where my job's gone and my interest, I just haven't kept up to speed with it all. But I've still got the principal understanding, which still holds water today, even though the world has moved on. Are we going to be those people when we're retired, being brought out of retirement to go and help people fix problems? And you get like COBOL programmers these days that can do that, because the skill set's faded. So who knows?
No, I think it's a useful thing, and I'm glad, because for me it sort of inspired a bit of enthusiasm again. I had settled right back to the Mac just does it, and actually being interested again did spark me back into Docker containers and bits of networking and all these kinds of things and home services. And it's not for everyone, I get that, but underlying this podcast for me is a passion for computers. It's not necessarily a passion for Apple, but a passion for devices and gadgets and gizmos and understanding how things work. And if one listener listens to this and is a little bit inspired to try it, I think we've done a good thing,
Completely agree.
Good. Okay. Speaking of things that we should probably move on, I'm going to talk about my app of the week. For this, you do need a Mac. This isn't going to run on your Linux machine because they've got really good virtual machine support built in anyway, so you don't need something like this. This is called Virtual Buddy. It's kind of a layer for being able to run virtual machines on Apple Silicon. This will let you run Linuxes on your Mac, as well as various versions of Mac OS, and it's just quite a nice layer by, I think it's Guy Rambo who actually writes this, who writes a number of very important Mac programs. But it's a layer onto the virtualization stuff that I was talking about earlier that Apple now built into the operating system. And if you do want to run Mac OS 12.3 or later via a virtualization layer or a Linux that runs on ARM processors, Debian and Ubuntu both support it. You can do this, and it supports all sorts of new features as well. So it's just a really nice little layer on top of it.
I think it's a good idea. And this developer, he's done some fantastic stuff, and he's a good commentator on the Apple scene. Less so these days, I think, than historically. But he's a really interesting guy if ever you hear him on a podcast.
Yeah, it's really good. So if you do want to tinker and you want a little bit more nuts and bolts than you get with something like a UTM or a Parallels or a VMware Fusion, then check out Virtual Buddy.
Okay. Next up then, thing of the week. So I've actually put my iPad Pro, I've put an M4 plus pencil plus keyboard, and I could probably say plus folio case. So I bought the iPad as soon as it came out. I knew I wanted one. Went from an M1 iPad to an M4, but I've gone down a size, and I was really nervous about going down a size, I must confess, because I was a little worried, is it going to be too small? I got used to having the big one. But I also wanted the small one because I want to hold it in my hand a bit more and read the newspaper or draw on it or whatever it may be. And you know what? I blew a load of money on it, but I've used it every day. And I'm happy to spend money on something that I use all the time. So I'm really glad I got it. And what I didn't want to do was buy one without cellular or one with a smaller storage and then wish I bought that one and then have to sell it in a year's time and buy the one I really wanted. So I bought 100% what I wanted. Probably didn't need to buy all the accessories day one, but I did. I could have waited till some of them were on sale. But it's lovely. It's a lovely bit of hardware. It's a lovely bit of engineering. But I have, probably a bit like you, got used to taking it off and just popping it in the folio case. And maybe I'll sit on the couch and I'll read the paper and do the crossword on it with the pencil. And that's what I wanted. That's why I wanted the smaller one. And I think I said at the time I bought it, I got the small one this time because last time around I had to have the big one, because the big one, you needed the extra resolution on it because it just mirrored the screen when you plugged in a monitor, whereas this time the little one can drive the big screen. So it's just a lovely bit of kit, and actually I really like the small size. I often use it in the kitchen when I'm cooking. I have the recipes up on it, or I want to watch the Formula One while I'm in the kitchen cooking, or whatever it may be, sit with it on the couch. I use it all the time. Fantastic. It is the device for me. So that was all I wanted to say. So I'm really happy with it. Oh, and the new pencil. Amazing. The barrel roll thing's quite nice. I'm not an artist, but I do like to scribble and take notes in meetings. And actually, when you plug up to your second screen, you can use the camera in your second screen, and therefore you can have the iPad, as long as it's plugged in, you can use it then to take notes and use one device to do both things, which is quite nice.
Good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. It looks like a devastatingly good bit of hardware. I won't go on about my thoughts about the operating system, but it does what you need it to do. So I think that's. And if you spend a bit of money on something that you're going to use every day, then how can somebody criticise you for that? That's fine.
It's well worth it for me, and my son's super chuffed because he's got an M1 iPad Pro to play with. So he's got a better piece of kit with a terabyte hard drive on it, so he's very happy too.
Excellent. I think we can call that a show, Chris.
Yeah, I think so. So if anyone wants to get in contact, Rod is at g5maniac@mastodon.scot. I'm at _CGP at mastodon.social. You can watch us on YouTube if you go to wakefromsleep.com and click on the YouTube link. Or feel free to drop us an email at wakefromsleep@protonmail.com.
Talk to you next week, Chris.
Cheers, Rod.